those taxes to fund social programs, ganyan, projects that will benefit the very people, no, that that paid those taxes. The dysfunction of the government would be corruption, 'di ba? Kasi corruption is imbis na yung funds ay napupunta nga sa social projects or social programs or projects, it goes somewhere else, no? So that's the dysfunction. Okay, next naman is yung kay Robert K. Merton, latent and manifest functions. So when you say manifest muna tayo. When you say manifest, these are the evident or parang obvious functions of an institution. So for example, in the case of a school or educational institutions, ang kanilang main function or ang kanilang manifest function ay mag-educate, magbigay ng instruction, magbigay ng knowledge, provide ng training. Latent function naman, when we say latent, no, the actual definition of the word latent is, well, it's obvious, it's the opposite of manifest. It's tago, well, not tago, yeah, not evident, parang ganun, hindi siya obvious. So the latent function of institutions are the sort of unintended or probably hidden functions of these institutions, yung mga hindi naman yun yung parang publicized function nila. So for example nga again, if the schools or educational institutions, ang function talaga nila ay mag-provide nga ng knowledge, ang latent function ay sometimes there are people who meet their romantic partners or their lifelong partners sa school, 'di ba? Hindi ka naman hopefully, no, hindi ka naman pumasok ng school para lumande, no, pero yun, there are people who meet their significant others sa school. It's not the function of the school, but it's what happened in school. Okay? Next naman is structuralism. So structuralism is often connected talaga sa functionalism. Ang tawag actually kapag kinabit siya dyan ay structural functionalism. Kasi sa structuralism, by the way, whenever you encounter structuralism, because you're going to hear this again in psychology later on, structuralism is its focus is always on components, on parts, what comprises something. So obviously in sociology, what we're going to look at is the structure or the parts that make up a society. So sabi nga rito, society is seen as a cohesive whole with parts. And those parts have functions. Kaya siya laging ikinakabit sa functionalism. Okay, next naman is conflict theory by Karl Marx. So conflict theory has three main assumptions, which I'm going to show in a slide later on or in the next ones. But I'm going to explain it na lang din muna. So first assumption, may three assumptions siya. First assumption, human beings are rational beings. No? Tayo ay mga logical, nag-iisip, reasonable beings. And we, of course, are going to prioritize our own self-interest. Now, we're going to act in our own self-interest. Second assumption, the resources that we have in our society is finite, is limited. No? So, assumption 3 or conclusion, society, it's inevitable that society will be in a state of conflict because you have human beings who are rational and are competing for limited resources. Okay, so you have human beings that are rational who will prioritize their own self-interest or will act in their self-interest, and they will be competing, no, for limited resources available in the world. Okay, so that's those are the three assumptions, or at least the parang yun yung main assumption ng conflict theory. Ngayon, out of conflict theory, may mga naipanganak ding ibang theories. So we have Marxism, feminism, and postcolonialism. So Marxism muna tayo. So the conflict in Marxism is between the bourgeoisie, or at least in this case, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. No? Kasi iba-iba depende sa stage of history. Saka na natin pag-uusapan, or kung ako man yung magdi-discuss, saka na siguro mapag-uusapan yung iba't ibang stages of history according kay Marx. Pero sa ngayon, the conflict is between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. So the bourgeoisie is the ruling class, yung mga mayayaman. And then the proletariat is the working class. Okay? And then the main problem of Marxism really is with exploitation. So exploitation is when your body produces value, but that value is not compensated accordingly. In other words, you are overworked and underpaid. Okay, so it's a problem in Marxism because no matter how hard you work, it seems like you're not really going to become rich. So because of the profiteering that capitalists do, you're not going to, even if you're the one that works harder than the actual capitalist, you're not going to become as rich as the capitalist. Parang ganun. Okay, next is feminism. So the feminism, the conflict is between masculine and feminine. So the conflict is not between men and women per se. It's masculine versus feminine. Why? Patriarchy is really the problem of feminism, yung gusto niyang sugpuin. So we define patriarchy as the culture that believes what is masculine is superior and what is feminine as inferior. So again, we're using the terms masculine and feminine because, for example, you are a man, but you have feminine qualities like you're emotional, you like other men, no? Apparently, 'di ba? It's a feminine quality. It's a quality that is at least in a patriarchal society or in a patriarchal culture reserved or parang expected only of women, yung liking men. So if you're a man who likes other men, if you're a man but you're emotional, you're also discriminated against, no? So it's not proper to pit men and women against each other. It's actually masculinity versus femininity that's the problem. Okay. And then finally, we have post-colonialism or racial theory or race theory. So the conflict here is obviously between the colonizer and the colonized. Okay. And one of the main assertions of colonial or post-colonial theory is that the colonized is always harmed. No, yung kinolonize ay laging nakaka-experience ng damage. Sila ay laging dehado, parang ganun. No matter how the colonizer spins the story. Parang yung mga sinabi natin kanina, white man's burden. Sa case naman ng Amerika sa atin, halimbawa yung tinatawag nating benevolent assimilation, yung paggamit nila ng education, pagbigay nila ng democratic government sa atin, ganyan. So that's their way of assimilating us. Yun. So no matter how these colonizers spin the story, the damage is still done sa mga kinolonize nila, sa mga inoccupy nila. So and a lot of the societal ills in a colonized society can be traced back sa colonizer sa panahon ng colonialism. Okay, so that's conflict theory. Lastly, we have symbolic interactionism. So the proponents here are Max Weber and George Mead. So the main assertion or the main assumption rather of symbolic interactionism is this. Um, each person has their own meaning makings, no? The meanings that we associate to things, to persons, to phenomenon, to events vary from person to person. Kumbaga, it's subjective. And that meaning making that we make or the meanings that we ascribe or associate to certain things are informed by our history, by our own by our past interactions, by our backgrounds. No? So, ibig sabihin, yung example na gagamitin sa next na mga slide ay halimbawa, naka-encounter ka ng aso, no? So, the meaning that you associate with the dog is going to, of course, be dependent on the kind of interactions that you've had with dogs in the past. So, if you're the kind of person who, halimbawa, nag-alaga kayo ng aso before, that's generally positive naman yung experience mo with them, then, of course, you're going to have a positive response dun sa aso. If you are someone halimbawa na nakagat ng aso or hinabol ka ng aso, ganyan, it's your interaction or meaning making for that dog is going to be negative, no? So yun naman yung idea ng symbolic interactionism. Very simple. We have our own unique meanings that we associate to certain things, and those meanings are informed by or influenced by our past, by our by our interactions in the past. Okay, so ayan yung theoretical perspectives in sociology. So I'll be flashing these for 5 seconds each so you can take a screenshot. So functionalism, although ito structural functionalism, ito kasi nakalagay parts, di ba, of a society. 5 minutes for each and then I'll go to the sample question on theoretical perspective. Next, conflict theory. And then symbolic interactionism. Okay, sample question tayo. according to this sociological perspective, perceptions about poverty is relative and is dependent on what one values. So what do you think is the perspective that sees or looks at poverty this way? Is it A, structural functionalist, B, conflict theory, C, symbolic interactionist, or D, post-colonialist theory? Okay, so parang sinasabi niya na magkakaiba ng definition sa poverty ang mga tao. For example, I will define poverty as not having access to basic necessities. Another person might define poverty as kapag wala na silang, hindi na sila nakapagsine, ganyan, or hindi na sila nakakapag leisure activities. No? So it depends on what one values. Ayan. Ayan. Thank you for sending in your answers. I think most of you got the correct answer, and that would be letter C, symbolic interactionist theory. Sabi natin sa symbolic interactionism, we have our own meanings that we associate to certain things, events, phenomenon, people. And those are definitely informed by our past, by our interactions, by our experiences in the past. Okay? So yun yung sinasabi dito na poverty is relative. Iba-iba tayo ng pagtingin sa kahirapan at nakadepende ito sa kung ano yung vina-value natin. Ano yung mga bagay na sa palagay natin ay pinakamahalaga. So for a person who would define poverty as the access to basic necessities, kapag wala yung basic necessities, feeling niya poverty na yon, no? As opposed to someone who is yun nga, who would see poverty as not being able to do leisure activities. Para sa kanya, pag di na siya nakapagsine, halimbawa, mahirap na siya. That means that what they value is that instead of yun nga, basic necessities, or yun yung vina-value nila. So for structural functionalists, a possible understanding for poverty would be it's caused by dysfunction of the government, specifically corruption. Diba? Conflict theory, siguro pinaka-straightforward dito, no? Bilang, again, the result or poverty is a result of capitalism, no? Despite the efforts or the hard work of people, they're not going to become rich. They're not going to be able to alleviate themselves from poverty because the capitalist is always going to be maximizing their self-interest. They're going to prioritize their self-interest, which is to gain profit. Okay, and then sa post-colonialist theory, we can say that, again, yung sinabi natin kanina, much of the societal ills that we experience today can be traced back, no, sa colonial period. So, for example, yung culture ng corruption and even ng political dynasties ay pwede nating may i-trace back sa Spanish colonial period. No? Specifically, when the Spaniards assigned the datus and the rajas very, very early on to become cabeza de barangays and gobernadorcillos. Kasi they, of course, obviously, ang daming polities kasi sa Pilipinas or sa islands na meron tayo before. Polities meaning pulo-pulo tayo, 'di ba? Iba-ibang barangay, iba-ibang community 'yan. So, mahirap para sa mga Kastila na i-consolidate sila. So, ang ginawa nila, they got in the parang good side of the existing leaders already. So, binigyan sila ng special rights, binigyan sila ng mga kalupaan, binigyan sila ng special status in society, ginawa silang prinsipalya, mga ganyan. So, in return, of course, they're going to serve the Spanish government in the sense na magiging under na ng Spanish government yung kanilang community. So, that's a start, 'di ba, of corruption of political dynasties. Political dynasties din kasi pinasa-pasa yung kapangyarihan. So it's not, they're not elected. Instead, kung sino yung naging anak ng datu, siya yung susunod na magiging kabesa de barangay or gobernadorcillo. So, ganun siya. So, corruption pa rin yun kasi nga, in exchange for special favors, di ba, you're going to give up or yun nga, you're going to not serve now your community. So, yeah. So, yun is a possible explanation of poverty sa post-colonialist theory. Ayan. So, it's already 3:17. Okay, so we'll be taking a 15-minute break. So let's resume by 3:32. Okay? So by the time that we resume, magpa-proceed na tayo sa psychology. Ayan, okay? Let's resume by 3:30.